Hello, and welcome to the Look-See for October 2025. We're in the last quarter of the year, even though it seems like the year just started. And I hope what's been happening in your life has been good, or at least manageable, because there's a lot happening out there. Lots going on in our world. And of all the things happening, a group of themes emerged in much of what I was seeing. So those themes are around artificial intelligence, illusion versus reality, and the need to get real and simplify life. So when I asked for a keyword for this month, I instantly got the word cavern. The symbolism of this word is more than a little interesting. It has a number of powerful meanings, kind of like a wow sort of word. A cavern is a symbol of death, of those who are half alive, and of the alchemy, like the alchemy of awakening and rebirth. Caverns also represent a need for refuge from the chaotic world of the physical senses. And Lord knows we've all been under assault. Our senses have been under assault for the past few years. A cavern represents a place of transformation, the kind of change and shifting that leads away from the illusions and shadows of the physical world and into the world of what is real. A rather perfect metaphor, don't you think, for our times? Yeah. Because of the darkness of a cavern, they are said to make humans, caverns are said to make humans aware of the divine light emanating from themselves. In other words, you are made of light, and you need to see that, and the cavern will make you aware of that. And it's also a place where you can develop the extra and more evolved set of senses known as the clairs. Clairaudience, clairsentience, clairvoyance, etc. The cavern also symbolizes initiation into freedom. Initiation into freedom. Wow. Something that people in the West might think they already have. However, the cavern tells us to think again, because a major part of its message is that we are wandering around in the dark and may have lost our freedom along the way and then failed to notice that this was happening. So after thinking about the symbolism of this word, I decided it was a pretty good keyword for the coming month. So with that, let's begin. Number one. The question I started with was, what is in the headlines over the next month? And immediately I saw headlines flashing by, dozens of them, all moving much too quickly for me to see what they were saying. And I was a little surprised, and I thought, whoa, too many headlines. I just wanted to see something that was happening and relevant. And immediately those headlines slowed down, and I managed to catch two of them. One was a man in a hospital bed, and the other was one that said, Portland cracks. There's fighting in the streets. And I was looking at Portland, Oregon, where there was a serious, serious breakdown of law and order at every level. Now, long ago, I had assumed that Portland cracked like back in 2020 when Antifa started taking control of some streets and neighborhoods. So I asked, was Portland going to crack again or in a different way? What does this message mean? And the response was, it is the beginning of the cracking of the American Union. The forces trying to break up the U.S. are still at work and succeeding. People are waking up, but it is too late. You will look back and say, it began in Portland. Number 2, there have been lots of predictions about problems around food, but I didn't expect to see the blatant fraud that is occurring. Oh my gosh. Not many people know that when grocery stores and big retail food chains call a produce seller to order big loads of perishable foods, that grocery store or retail chain must be a licensed member of PACA, the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act or Association, PACA, PACA. So what's been happening is that purchasers pretending to be PACA members are placing large orders of vegetables and fruits. The order is packed up, put on a truck, but once on the road, the load is diverted to an unknown location and disappears. When the produce seller who packed and shipped that big load of food then sends his invoice to the grocery or retail chain that he thinks placed the order, it turns out someone fraudulently used that company's name, address, phone, and email to place the order. The grocery store or retail chain receiving the invoice did not order it, and they didn't receive such an order either. The result? The company who shipped the food never gets paid. Not only is this a signal that food supply sources are already having trouble, it will seriously contribute to climbing prices, especially if companies now have to hire security to make sure their orders aren't hijacked or buy insurance in case a shipment disappears. Food shortages are still shaping up to be a serious problem over the next few years, and grocery store shelves may have much more space on them. If they are full, it may be because no one can afford to buy what they have to sell. So heads up, it's time to start taking responsibility for making sure you have food to eat. Number 3, the issue of daylight savings time is coming up again. Lots of people don't like it and wish we didn't have to bother with it. Now, a study has found that standard time is healthier for people. If we just left the clock alone, it turns out that cases of obesity and stroke would drop. Although the percentages of change would be small, it would amount to 2.6 million fewer people with obesity and 300,000 fewer cases of stroke every year. Another study reported that teens and young people are poorly affected by daylight time because that age group tends to become more active and more troublesome toward the end of the day. When sunlight extends late into the evening hours, this accentuates the trouble. The study pointed out that when daylight ends earlier, teens and young people tend to quiet down a little. And you know, when I was young, we did not have daylight savings time. And I remember how disruptive it was to our lives. Oh my, it was harder to get up in the morning, and it was harder to go to bed at night. We did not lose any hours. There's still 24 hours in a day, and there's still X amount of hours of sunlight, but we lost a quality of steadiness and smoothness that we didn't really even know we had until we lost it. Number 4, people are losing touch with reality. They're getting lost in the illusions created by artificial intelligence. Children should not be playing with AI, especially if they have not moved successfully through the stage of development known as abstract thinking. Abstract thinking brings one to a level of relationship with reality in which you're able to look at something, assess a variety of paths and options, play with the different outcomes in your mind until you discern the best outcome for the self. And only then do you take action in the real world. Without this capacity, children are extremely vulnerable. And this is beginning to show in the problems that parents are dealing with. Some children have committed suicide because they could not shift into the reality created by an AI program called character.ai. Character.ai. This same kind of unrealistic expectation occurs in adults who have not successfully navigated abstract thinking in their own lives and who then have unrealistic expectations around spiritual development, higher consciousness, and the idea of a new earth. We are here on planet Earth in a three-dimensional reality. And whether we're dealing with imaginary worlds woven by artificial intelligence or praying desperately for spiritual ascension, we still need to chop wood, carry water, and wash our socks. These things are real and necessary. Shifting into a more spiritual and awakened consciousness does not remove the 3D reality. It simply changes the way you view and respond to reality. And that really changes everything. Number 5. September 23rd was supposed to be the rapture. It didn't happen. Nothing happened. So what is the rapture? It's the evolution of humanity to a higher frequency of consciousness, which then leads to a whole new worldview and understanding of the nature of reality. Here's the thing. Frequency is consciousness, and the level of frequency determines the kind of consciousness you can have. If you really want to understand this, come and take a class in intuition. It's simple, but whoa, is it powerful. Number 6. People keep saying that AI is going to take over the world, but I see AI having some trouble coming up here over the next year or two. It's going to cause some initial losses for those who have invested heavily in it. One of the problems is heat. The AI data centers being built, especially those in the South, tend to overheat and seem to be always on the verge of shutting down. Another problem is what I would call an overreaction to AI potential. It's true, there is big, big potential. Wow. But it will take time to learn to use AI wisely and well in order to make the investments pay off. As we wait for that payoff, the investments and the hype die down quite a bit. So if you are an investor, don't give up or freak out if we have an AI event similar to the dot-com bust. It will recover slowly, and it will be more sensible and useful. AI will be more sensible and useful after recovery. Number 7. The loss of jobs is continuing to spread across the U.S. and the countries of the West. It's everywhere. And if you're in a job that is likely to be replaced by robots, by technology, or AI, it's important to begin shifting your lifestyle. Buy a smaller home and move into it. Start growing some of your food. Let go of expensive cars and get something that has no payments. Let go of the idea that you need expensive clothing and get clothing that is versatile and has good utility. The key word for the last half of the 2020s is simplify. Number 8. If you look back through time, look back far enough, you'll see that there was a time when religion was in control. Religion was the government, and the priests were all powerful. Then along came the idea of nations. Religions didn't like this idea because it diluted their power. However, it was an idea whose time had come, and eventually nations became the seat of material governance, while religions settled for spiritual governance. This split, material and spiritual, left us with two masters, governments and religions, each competing for our allegiance and our money. The Vatican, unable to beat the power of nations and their laws, became its own state and has maintained that status for centuries. It is tiny, yes, but it wields enormous power. So here we are, almost 2,000 years later, the State of Israel gets created. That was in 1948. It was the second nation state in modern times to be based completely on the idea of religion. Today, we have Muslims developing and building Muslim communities across the US and the West. Are we seeing a super slow trend here? Like took 2,000 years? Yeah, it took centuries to copy the Vatican's idea of a religious state. But once Israel was created, it took less than a century for the Muslims to begin copying the idea. Today, there are a number of Muslim enclaves in the US. Somali Muslims in Minnesota just declared that the city of Minneapolis belongs to them. Dearborn, Michigan is heavily Muslim, and when you drive down the streets, the storefronts and signs are all in Arabic. In Warren, Michigan, a neighbor of Dearborn, Muslims recently decided to do their noon prayers in the middle of a major street, blocking traffic in all directions. Communities that are all Muslim and based on Sharia law have been built around Texas, which pushed Governor Abbott to sign a law banning Sharia compounds in that state. Because of clashes between American law and Sharia law, 12 states in the US have enacted, it's called ALAC, A-L-A-C, American Law for American Courts. So 12 states have enacted ALAC laws, American laws for American courts, in order to try to limit the expansion of Muslim reach that's occurring in all branches of the US government. I bring this up not because I think the Muslim expansion is bad, but to make you aware that change is constant. And it's usually ignored in the early stages. The main thing to be concerned about is that when you put two or more vastly different cultures together, you have the perfect setup for clashes, division, and fighting between factions and groups, especially if bad actors discover they can disrupt those groups using propaganda and false flags to create distrust and fear. A well-timed false flag can be blamed on one of the factions, and that's when the fighting begins. It won't matter that they've been living together peacefully for hundreds of years, and in the US, they have not been living together peacefully for years. It's only been 5 years since the setup for violence began with the immigration invasion. When people want power, they look around for a convenient structure, institution, or situation that offers it. We can all see what's happening in England, Europe, and America. Somebody wants power, and it's clear they are trying desperately to get it. Everyone in these countries has been set up. What is most important to keep in mind is that in the chaos that is triggered, there are usually 4 sides. It's easy to spot the first 2 sides. They're the ones fighting each other. It's a little more difficult to identify the side who triggered the fighting, thinking that side would grab power. And that 4th side, it's usually a wild card, a disorganized, aggressive, unforeseen opportunist that sees a chance to grab power, land, control, money, and whatever else is there for the taking. The 2 sides who are fighting almost always lose. Both sides lose. The one who triggered the fighting in hopes of getting control does not always win. In fact, frequently loses. And the upstart opportunist almost always comes out ahead. Awareness and readiness are the keys to avoiding the manipulation, propaganda, and the false flag trap. And I do see some serious false flag traps coming. Heads up. Number 9. I decided I'd tune into Donald Trump just to see how he was doing. And when I tuned into him, I could see that he and his team are struggling. A few on the team are thinking that maybe they should have gone about saving the country a little differently. The thinking when they started was that once Trump was elected, they would focus on several fronts. They would keep people happy by very visibly and quickly changing some of Biden's policies, stopping the invasion at the border, reversing the transgender push happening in schools and the military. They would draw attention away from climate stories, get money coming in again, use the internet to support alternative media, and also to build their own narrative, and slowly rebuild the country. It sounds like a good plan, a workable plan. And their assumptions were that people would go along with these plans, and the majority would be both satisfied and grateful. They assumed that most people just want to make a living, raise their families, and live their lives. And there is some truth to that. They assumed the majority would be happy to be free of Democrat craziness, the blatantly 2-tiered justice system, and the threat of mandated vaccines. And some, they were sure people would be happy with their version of truth. And many people are happy to see these changes. However, there were some serious miscalculations. People are not interested in versions of the truth. They are interested in reality. People aren't willing to just go along and be happy making a living when their wages remain stagnant for decades and the price of everything keeps going up. They aren't happy seeing the country's debt skyrocket while nothing is done to fix the situation. They aren't happy to give up expensive democratic foreign aid in exchange for new wars in new areas. And people are not satisfied to be done with gender dysphoria when they know that children are still disappearing. They aren't thrilled that green energy is being replaced by high energy bills. And they were never fooled by denials of weather control using chemtrail sprays and HARP arrays. So the problem is that all the happy stories in the world are not enough to cover up the horrors of the COVID lies, lockdowns, and vaccine deaths. Happy stories are not going to make up for the millions of foreigners now disrupting life, culture, local governments, and personal security in cities across the entire Western world. These stories, happy stories, are not enough to get people to overlook the fact that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were working for Israel and were systematically entrapping U.S. politicians in honeypots, pornography, pedophilia, and trafficking schemes that gave Israel complete control of our country, of every country that they did this in. Control they intended to wield around the globe from their spot in the center of the Middle East on the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. The problem is that distractions and happy stories are no longer useful weapons when the underlying reality just keeps leaking out of the corners and cracks. Let me say it again. People are interested in reality. And until we have the courage to deal with the good, the bad, and the ugly, things will continue to fester. And we run the risk of destroying the body politic altogether. Number 10. Let's talk about leadership and doubles. There are rumors that China's Xi Jinping has had a serious stroke and is in the hospital. If this is true, it will be his third stroke, and he will likely be unable to maintain his position as president of China and head of the Chinese Communist Party. Stories are flying in every direction, with some saying, oh, it was a fake stroke, giving him an excuse to avoid the fourth plenum coming up, I think, next Wednesday on October 20th. Some think there was no stroke at all, and that Xi got caught up in a power struggle, lost, and is now being detained at a military hospital. Others say the stroke was brought on by dark forces that sought to prevent Xi from attending the plenum. They're trying to get rid of him. Adding to the confusion everywhere about what's actually happening with Xi, it was announced that Xi would give a keynote talk on October 13th at the Women's Summit. If he really did have a stroke, there's no way he could give a keynote speech less than a week later. The consensus was that he would probably send a double to give the speech in an effort to maintain the status quo. And this brings us to the use of doubles. We, meaning those of us who make up the general population, cannot go on putting up with the game of body doubles, lookalikes, and clones. What is the point of choosing a leader or electing a president if the person we chose ends up being a mirage or computer-generated image of the living human being we thought we were electing? What is the point of having a leader or president at all? We might as well put a photo on the wall and pretend it is our leader. If we go along with the idea that it's okay to replace a president with a lookalike or a clone, we are living a lie right along with the lookalike or clone. When we tolerate the double and go along with this charade, It's just like pretending the emperor has new clothes. Who are we fooling besides ourselves? I don't care how old the practice is or how long kings and presidents have been using doubles. A double is not who we voted for. A double is not the real man we are listening to. A double is an illusion. It's a message that someone is playing a role while someone else is making the decisions and pulling the strings. The longer we accept this as normal, the further we move away from reality, and the longer this charade can be used to maintain endless control. If we continue to play along, how can anything change? It can't, and it won't. A whole series of fake people could be paraded in front of us. And if we believe that they are all one and the same person, if we are not seeing and hearing the subtle changes that come with each version of the illusion, if we're now watching for deception, then we are lost as free human beings. We will end up dealing with something we cannot quite put our finger on and cannot articulate. That something will be a web of lies and confusion in which we find ourselves lost in the mirage being pushed on us. We will discover that we have been captured in an eternal Truman Show because the initial use of doubles and clones evolves to become total control by hidden people creating illusions of good leaders while nothing of substance is allowed to change. We end up frustrated and feeling secretly guilty for wanting something different. It's like the woman who has a handsome, hardworking, successful husband, a beautiful home, lovely children, and everything society tells her she should want. But she isn't happy because she can't do what she wants with her own life. She's a prisoner of her situation. This is where pretending clones, doubles, and lookalikes will lead. A substitute is one thing, like a substitute teacher. We all see it's a substitute. It's honest, upfront, and an open admission that someone is standing in for someone else. A double or clone is something else. It's a deception that has no boundaries. Allowing our government to engage in using doubles, clones, or lookalikes has no boundaries and no end to the deceptions. Eventually, we will be unable to tell what is real and unable to enjoy life because deep inside, we know something is wrong. What is it that we will sense? It will be the knowing that something in us has stopped growing in wisdom, power, and the great grace that carries us forward on waves of dynamic change. Number 11. I saw not just one, but two volcanic eruptions over the next several months. Volcanoes and earthquakes will continue to be a problem for the next couple of years. Back in January of this year, I saw a volcano eruption on a coastline, or maybe just offshore. It caused minor damage, yet I thought a few people lost their lives, even though the damage was minor, because of it. So in June, Mount Etna erupted, and that may have been the volcano I saw at the beginning of the year. People were somewhat shaken, but relieved that it hadn't been any worse. They were more fascinated, actually, by the whole eruption process than afraid of the power of the volcano. A similar scene came up again this month. And this time there were several really strong earthquakes accompanying the volcanic action. In that January vision, I thought the volcano was in the northwest US, right along the coast or just off the coast. But this time I wasn't sure, and there was more than one eruption. Now, it could be Mount Etna again. It could be Campi Flegrei. It could be one of the volcanoes in Greece, or in the northwest US, in Japan, or in the Philippines. Wherever these eruptions occur, those who live in vulnerable areas ought to keep one eye on readiness to deal with Mother Nature and the shenanigans of our planet. The Great Mother gives us lots of warnings when change is afoot on planet Earth. These changes are not just a shaking of the earth or some lava rolling across the ground and down the mountain. They include changes in magnetic fields and in gases and radioactivity coming from the ground that cause headaches, nausea, and a feeling of like not being well. Then there is the fine ash that destroys lungs and irritates eyes, not to mention disruptions in travel, in climate, and in growing conditions. Sometimes stuff won't grow in a volcanic area for years. So we live on an active living planet, and it's never too late to learn the messages Earth is giving us about how she works, what she needs, and what she is about to do. Number 12. I'm watching the budget and government standoff between the Democrats and the Republicans. You know, we've got the shutdown now. So we've been told that the Democrats want over $1 trillion added to the budget to cover the cost of feeding, housing, and providing medical care to illegal immigrants. I don't know what the Republicans want, but it's obvious they don't want to feed, house, or care for illegals. As we were coming up to the September 30th budget deadline, I kept thinking that the Democrats couldn't possibly be foolish enough to make such a demand, because they had to know, they're not stupid, that the Republicans and the public would not go along with such a plan. And I knew that Donald Trump was going to run with a shutdown, using it as an opportunity to get rid of people, whole departments, and many pork operations that are not really necessary for a government to run smoothly. If that was clear and obvious to me, it should have been just as clear and obvious to the Democrats. Apparently, it wasn't obvious, and the government is now partially shut down. And just as I expected, Trump is using the shutdown to let go of thousands of government jobs. So let's just step back a bit and take a look with an unbiased eye at the situation. We could see the shutdown as a way to achieve some serious cost savings. We could say it's good to simplify government. We could view it as just another left versus right argument in which the right temporarily has the higher ground. We could see it as a wake-up call to those in government who thought they were financially safe and who must suddenly face a reorganization, total reorganization of their thinking, their emotions, their money, and their lives. Wow. Every day that the shutdown continues is a day that the government shrinks. So imagine standing here in a not too distant future in which we, the people, no longer have a working government. The government has shrunk away to nothing. All that is left is the executive issuing executive orders. The pretense of electing senators and representatives who neither listen nor care about the people back home is over. Most power has reverted to the states, which must now respond to their people. So we might ask ourselves, was that the plan all along? Are we looking at the beginning of a carefully planned and carried out closure of a system that became hopelessly corrupt and had to be taken down from within in such a way that a violent revolution was not necessary? Let me say that again. Are we looking at the beginning of a carefully planned and carried out closure of a government system that became hopelessly corrupt and therefore had to be taken down from within in such a way that a violent revolution was not necessary? Are we looking at a population that is now fully captured and no longer has a voice or leadership because their representative government was eliminated in a carefully planned coup carried out by people who proclaimed to be fighting the New World Order, but whose real plan was to break up the U.S. and return it to a collection of independent states? Can I say balkanization? Number 13. Lots of people have been excited about the agreement between Israel and Hamas that released prisoners on both sides, including myself. I was like, oh, thank God. Some people are saying Hamas won the war and they got everything they wanted. But it looks to me like they also got something they may not want. Because along with the release of hostages comes a very questionable plan that calls for Israel to partially withdraw from Gaza, then for Gaza to be demilitarized so that they won't be able to defend themselves, and then for the setup of a transitional leadership group headed by Donald Trump. This transitional group will then hand off leadership to Tony Blair and a group of non-political businessmen, non-political, yeah, sure, including Larry Ellison. And all of those businessmen are or were, or still are, aligned with the big global banks. Blair and the businessmen will oversee the rebuilding of Gaza, with much of that rebuilding financed by the Gulf states. Wow. What kind of agreement is that? The people of Gaza wanted their own state, their own nation. How can they say they have a Palestinian state if Trump, Blair, Ellison, and others are running things? Tony Blair is nothing but a Rothschild puppet, and Larry Ellison is an Israeli stooge, a technocrat loyal only to Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel. What could go wrong? I love the fact that the prisoners on both sides have been released. I love the fact that there's been an effort to end the genocide in Gaza. But what I see is that the schemers and dreamers pulling the strings of the West are still hoping to set up a world government and run the world from the beautiful shores of the Mediterranean Sea, a location they consider to be a good alternative to running things from Ukraine, which was their original plan. Israel's location is central to everything: Asia, Europe, Africa, Australia, and to a lesser extent, the Americas. north, central, and south. The peace plan does not look very stable as I look ahead. So that's it for this look-see. And for those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a brief look at what is happening in our world and where the big trends are headed. Reality is not fixed. It's dynamic and changes according to what we are doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real. We make a choice. We take some kind of action. We put something together or we take it apart. Those decisive actions are what determine the path and the outcome. Of course, once we set something in motion, it does take a lot to make a change or get things going in another direction. And that is exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction that things are going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way, save time, money, and energy, and prepare for what looks inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help things along. It's important to look ahead and assess what is happening. Where are we going? So we know whether or not we need to do something different. So thank you so much for listening. Keep your eyes open and your wits about you. And we'll see you in November. Take care.